The city of Sighisoara lies at the northern border of the Saxon region of Transylvania. Its name is derived from the combination of the ancient Hungarian word Stag, or Sig, meaning hill, and Var, meaning castle. The region of the Tarnava Valley has been inhabited since ancient times. The Castrum Stanarum outpost was built in this region to protect the important road leading to Alba Iulia. Geza II, then later in the 12th century, Andrew II, invited the Saxons to settle in the then thinly populated area. They founded Sighisoara in 1191 or 1198. The city was one of Transylvania's most important cities from both economic and religious point of view. It was granted the royal town title in 1367, and in the 16th and 17th centuries it became the political center of the region. Aeneas Silvius Piccolomini, the famous Italian humanist poet, writer, scholar, and politician, as well as the future Pope Pius II, wrote with admiration about the medieval city. 100 years later, in 1564, Giovandra Gromi, the Italian Guard commander of John Sigismund Zappalia, gives a detailed description of Sighisoara in his route recommendations to Cosimo de' Medici of Florence, future Duke of Tuscany. Romania's most complete medieval architectural ensemble, the historic city center of Sighisoara, has been a World Heritage Site since 1999. The medieval castle district, the Upper Town, and the crescent-shaped Lower Town surrounding the castle hill form a harmonious architectural design unique in the country. Although the old Lower Town is as old as the Upper Town, it has lost most of its medieval character due to modern reconstructions. It centers on the market square, with 24 of its buildings on the castle side declared as monuments. Among these are the mostly eclectic palaces of public institutions. Of special note here is the Schuler House, where the city's former mayor, Johann Schuler von Rosenthal, who was originally a shoemaker, lived. Above the arched entrance, the former owner's coat of arms is visible, in which a hand holds 3 roses with the caption underneath, Per spinas ad rosas, that is, through thorns to roses. Schuler was beheaded in 1703 because of his immoral way of life. The ancient core of the city, the castle, built on the 72-meter-high Castle Hill, stands out from its surroundings like an island. It is still inhabited today. The impressive fortress is surrounded by steep hills and wood-covered slopes. Its walls hide the most picturesque medieval castle district in Transylvania. The ornate towers and rugged bastions of the Castle Hill, covered with winding medieval streets and old houses, rise protectively over the city. Construction of the first wooden castle of Sighisoara began in 1191. It was destroyed during the Mongol invasion. Then the top of the castle hill, the upper town, was gradually built in with walls and towers. The new castle was first mentioned in 1280. The originally 4-meter-high, 930-meter-long castle walls were continually heightened and extended over the centuries, until in the 17th century it reached as high as 15 meters. The 14 watchtowers were named after the guild financing their construction. Today, besides the clock tower, only 8 bastions remain standing. Those of the tanners, the tailors, the blacksmiths, the furriers, the shoemakers, the butchers, the rope makers, and the tin founders. The towers of the barbers, the goldsmiths, the locksmiths, the weavers, and the coopers were destroyed by the Kuruts. The Old Ladies' Corridor, built of wood in 1844, opens from the court of the castle. Its purpose was to make access to the castle easier in rainy and cold weather. The main entrance and symbol of the city, the 64-meter-high Baroque clock tower, marks the city's center. Unlike the other bastions, this was defended by the city's military forces, not the guilds. Originally built in the 14th century, its first floor was the seat of the medieval town's council until 1556. The former council chamber can be found on the ground floor. Its 2-meter-thick walls once protected the city's gunpowder warehouse, treasury, and archives. The tower was rebuilt in 1677 after a fire. This is when the Baroque upper parts were constructed. The roof was covered with tin-glazed earthenware in 1891. Since 1899, the 4-story tower has been the home of the city's historical museum, including exhibitions of the old guilds, pottery making in Sighisoara, and old-time pharmaceuticals, as well as a Saxon room with medieval furniture and a torture chamber. The main attraction of the clock tower is its famous Clockwork Show, which was installed in 1648 when Johannes Kerschel's metal clockwork was put in place. Every day at midnight, a painted statue of a Roman god appears in a small window on the face of the clock. The statues represent the 7 days of the week: Diana, Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, Venus, Saturn, and the Sun. The other remaining towers line up at the inner castle walls in a clockwise direction. The first and the most modest is the Tanner's Tower, built in the 14th century. In contrast with this, the Tin Founder's Tower, also built in the 14th century, is truly impressive, with its 24-meter-high bulwark. It was built along with the other towers, but later underwent several changes. The rectangular base of the first and second floors became pentagonal, while the top, mace-like level is octagonal. The Ropemaker's Tower stands nearby the Monastery Church and guards the top of the hill. Its cellar houses the oldest parts of the castle walls. Some sources say that the Turtle Gate was used to herd the sheep behind the city walls in case of danger. Others say that the gates were used for the passage of flocks on a daily basis. The two sides of the gate are guarded by the butchers' and the furriers' towering bastions. The lower section of the butcher's tower preserved its original shape, but the top two floors were built in the 16th century. Its location allowed the flanking of the enemy besieging the main gate. The Furrier's Bastion was damaged in the Great Fire of 1676, but it was later restored. The Tailor's Tower is one of the most beautiful. It was probably built in the 14th century to protect the western entrance of the city. Its double gates used to have an iron latticed gate that was destroyed in an explosion during the previously mentioned fire. The hexagonal Shoemaker's Tower received its shape in 1681, after being seriously damaged in the Great Fire. Behind the Monastery Church stands the Blacksmith's Tower, erected in 1631 in place of the former Barber's Tower. It protected the castle's main routes of transportation, and its top level was used as the fire station of the city. The Monastery Church is the oldest and most beautiful building in the square, located behind the clock tower. It was built in place of the Romanesque monastery, which was raised by the Dominicans in the 13th century. The church was rebuilt in the Gothic style between 1484 and 1515. The three-nave church, dedicated to the Virgin Mary, houses the following treasures: Jacob's masterpiece, a bronze baptismal pool dating back to 1440, a 35-piece collection of Oriental carpets from the 13th century, a fine Baroque altarpiece from 1680, and a beautiful organ, thanks to which the church is used as a concert hall even today. The sanctuary was first mentioned in 1298 when the Pope pardoned the sins of all who took part in the masses celebrated in the church. During the reconstruction, the roof was raised and the chapel was transformed into a three-nave hall church. In 1556, the Dominicans left the city and the church was occupied by the Lutherans, while the monastery became the property of the city council. The church is monumental and simple, without any exterior decorations. However, the longitudinal arched windows of the facade and the east side, and the main entrance with its beautiful Renaissance framework are worth mentioning. The Neo-Renaissance Town Hall, built between 1886 and 1888, lies north of the church. It used to be the county seat. After the reorganization of the county system in 1867, the city's leadership decided to build a larger building. The Dominican Monastery on the site was demolished in 1886, and the county hall was built in its place, based on the plans of Alpar Ignatius, designer of numerous similar buildings in the Carpathian Basin. The grand room of the town hall offers a splendid view of the plain of Albesti. In the small park next to the building stands the bust of the famous Hungarian poet Sándor Petőfi. The Roman Catholic Church, built in the 19th century, stands near the town hall. During the Reformation, the Saxon population of the city converted to the Lutheran faith, and the Dominicans had to leave the city. Both churches, the Monastery Church and the church on the hill, became Lutheran. Catholic religious life began to re-emerge in 1702, when a Franciscan monk came to Sighisoara and preached under the open air, initially living in a wooden hut. Construction of the current parish began in 1892, and that of the church began in 1895 in eclectic style. Located on the small square between the clock tower and the monastery church, the House of Dracula is one of the most popular and oldest civil buildings of the castle. The ruler of Wallachia, Vlad Dracul II, lived here between 1431 and 1435. Here, they say, the infamous Vlad Tepes, or Vlad the Impaler, was born and lived until the age of 4. He later became infamous for his cruel executions by impalement. In some of the written documents, especially that of the Saxon merchants with whom Vlad Tepes had constant clashes, he appears as a tyrant ruler who inhumanely tortured and executed his enemies. This is why his figure was associated with the vampire myths and legend from which the world-famous Dracula legend was born. Although the house was probably built later, and some believe that his family never even lived here, the memory of Vlad Tepes is preserved by a statue standing in the small square to the left of the monastery church. Today, the house serves as a bar and medieval restaurant. The House with Stag in the Castle District's main square is a typical building of the Transylvanian late Renaissance. It received its name after the stag head fixed on the corner of the building since 1693. Over the centuries, it served as the residence of city officials, judges, and religious personalities. The building, erected in the 13th century, was rebuilt several times in the next 500 years, and only a few of its original wall paintings remain. The rooms on the ground floor are graced with semi-cylindrical arches, those on the upper floor with vaulted ceilings. The three-pane protruding window frames harken back to Transylvanian Renaissance architectural forms. Nowadays, the building houses the Romanian-German Cultural Center, a modern guest house, and a cafe-restaurant. The Scholars' Stairs, leading from the main square to the castle hill, were built in 1642. The stairs originally had 300 steps, but but after the reconstruction of 1849, their number fell to 175. The passage was named after the scholars attending this school nearby, and it was covered for their comfort and safety too, reputedly protecting them not only against rain, but also from the rain of arrows during sieges, so education could continue without interruption. The church on the hill, or Lutheran Castle Church, stands on the highest point of the castle and dates back to 1350. In 1463, a 42-meter-high tower was attached to its western side, then left unfinished. The asymmetrical shape of the tower is due to the fact that it includes an old stronghold. The church received its present form during its 1991 to 2001 renovation. A 13th century Romanesque Dominican sanctuary stood at the site of this Gothic Saxon church dedicated to St. Nicholas. The tombs inside the crypt are dated from the 16th and 18th centuries. This hall-like three-nave church is one of the most important architectural monuments of the castle, as well as one of the most spectacular Gothic churches in Transylvania. The reticulated vaults and the altars gathered from the surrounding temple fortresses are especially beautiful. The sanctuary and the triumphal arch were decorated with frescoes in 1488 by the painter Valentine, the future mayor of Sighisoara. The frescoes were covered with whitewash during the 1776 restoration and only uncovered in 1934. The Renaissance furniture of the temple was made by the famous Johannes Reichmuth, who lived in Sighisoara during the 16th century. Another extremely valuable element is the late Gothic fret-sawed stone tabernacle, one of the most beautiful decorative Gothic sculptures in Transylvania. The polyptych altar, representing St. Martin, is the work of Johann Stolz from 1520. Many Gothic elements can be found on the inside and the outside of the temple, like the net vaults, broken arch windows decorated with fret-sawed stone, and the buttresses supporting the exterior walls. On the southeastern wing of the choir, several sculptures can still be seen that were probably part of a more complex scene. Their value is greatly increased by the fact that they are among the few stone Gothic sculptures left in Transylvania. The cemetery chapel stands next to the castle church in place of the 14th century goldsmith's tower that was struck by lightning and destroyed in 1809. The graves of the Lutheran Saxon cemetery are lined up behind the temple. Near the castle church stands the early 17th century German Lutheran gymnasium, once famous throughout Transylvania. Today, this former cultural center of the Transylvanian Saxons bears the name of its former director, Joseph Haltrick.